We are incredibly habitual organisms. Unless we intervene in our habits, they tend to carry out the same way that they always have once they've formed. When I travel, I tend to brush my teeth at more or less the same time of day relative to when I wake up as I do when I'm at home. So it's context independent. So it's a very strong habit. The goal of any habit that we want to form is to get into what's called automaticity. If you have all these goals and things that you want to be doing on a regular basis, you'd love for them to be habitual because it takes less mental and physical effort, less limbic friction in order to execute those. Habits are things that our nervous system learned, but not always consciously. Sometimes we develop habits that we're not even aware of until they become a problem. Now, many people think that habits are just like reflexes. But pure reflexes are things like the eye blink reflex. Something comes toward your eye and you don't want it to get in your eye, you'll blink. Those aren't habits. Those are what we call hardwired reflexes. And anytime we're talking about habits, that means our nervous system learns something. But the fact of the matter is that habits are a big part of who we are. It's estimated that up to 70% of our waking behavior is made up of habitual behavior. We are very habitual. And we tend to do things more or less over and over in the same way unless we intervene in ourselves. That's just the way that we are wired. There are popular books about habits, and there's a whole psychological literature about habits. And those two areas point to some very interesting aspects of habits that I think are worth mentioning. For the same habit to be formed, it can take anywhere from 18 days to as many as 254 days for different individuals to form that habit, which was taking walks after dinner. How did they know when they formed the habit? Well, they were doing it about 85% of the time. And they also reported not having to spend that much mental effort in order to get into the mode of taking a walk after dinner. People are highly variable. And if you can't form one habit easily, it doesn't mean that you can't form other habits easily. These could be things as basic as brushing your teeth before breakfast or brushing your teeth after breakfast. It could be, for instance, that you get exercise or you get it at a particular time of day, or even that you take a particular route to work, right? With each repetition of a habit, small changes occur in the cognitive and neural mechanisms associated with procedural memory. We distinguish between what's called episodic memory and procedural memory. Episodic memory is a recall of a particular set of events that happened, whereas procedural memory is holding in mind the specific sequence of things that need to happen in order for a particular outcome to occur. So think of it like a recipe or a protocol. Just one mental exercise of thinking through what are the sequence of steps required in order to perform this habit from start to finish can shift the likelihood of being able to perform that habit from unlikely or to moderately likely to very likely over time. So that's remarkable to me. And the literature is really robust. A simple visualization exercise, or it doesn't even have to be done eyes closed. Simple tool, but very powerful tool according to the psychology literature. We really can't have a discussion about learning anything, habits or otherwise, unless we talk about reward prediction error. Reward prediction error is a very good system, or I should say a lens through which to think about whether or not we should reward ourselves for performing a given habit. Reward prediction error, quite simply, is if you expect a reward and the reward comes, a particular behavior that was associated with generating that reward is more likely to occur again. Reward prediction error also says that if we expect a reward and the reward doesn't come, that the pattern of dopamine release will follow a particular contour. What's going to happen is that my level of dopamine is actually going to drop below the baseline, meaning below the level of dopamine I had before I even started the habit execution. When we think a reward is going to come, it starts to actually arrive earlier in the form of dopamine release. This is the feeling that we experience as in positive anticipation. You tell a kid, hey, we're going to go to the amusement park or we're going to go get ice cream. They haven't had the ice cream yet. They're not at the amusement park, but they're excited. The dopamine release comes earlier. Reward prediction error governs virtually all aspects of effort and all aspects of learning. The sorts of sensory events that we're paying attention to changes when there's a lot of dopamine in our system. You can leverage this for habit formation. If you are considering adopting a new habit, or if you are trying to break a habit, it's very useful to think not just about the procedural aspects of what you're going to do, but also think about the events that precede and follow that particular habit and the execution, or at least the effort to execute that habit. So not just thinking about how great I'm going to feel after, but also thinking about how hard it's going to be at the beginning, and then trying to reward myself subjectively for the entire experience. But what about breaking habits? Certainly many people out there would like to break habits that they feel don't serve them well. There are a couple of tools that neuroscience and psychology tell us can be very beneficial. Some of those things are somewhat intuitive and relate to what I call foundational practices, meaning things that set the overall tone in your body and brain. So things like stress reduction, things like getting good sleep, things like quality nutrition, things like having positive routines arranged throughout your day. All of those, of course, will support you in trying to break particular habits. Now, in order to break synapses or to break apart neural connections that are serving a habit that you don't want to engage in, we need to engage the process called long-term depression. And long-term depression has nothing to do with a state of mental depression or a reduction in mood. So how do you take two neurons that underlie a habit out of synchrony? What actually has to happen is bringing conscious awareness. To the period immediately afterward, which I think most people recognize. They realize, oh, I just did it again. Let's say you tell yourself you're not going to pick up your phone, you're not going to bite your nails, you're not going to reflexively walk to the refrigerator at a particular time of day, but you find yourself doing it anyway. And in that moment, capture the sequence of events, not that led to the bad habit execution, but actually to take advantage of the fact that the neurons that were responsible for generating that bad habit were active a moment ago, and to actually engage in a replacement behavior immediately afterward. The stage or the period immediately after the bad habit execution is a unique opportunity to insert a different type of what we would call adaptive behavior, but that could be any behavior that's not in line with the bad behavior. One thing that you've probably heard over and over about habit formation is not true. And what I'm referring to is this idea that if you are very specific about exactly when you're going to perform a particular habit, that you are more likely to perform that habit. But the literature indicates that people who do that, who are very rigid about when they do things, tend, because of context dependence, to not necessarily stick to those habits over time. Some people do, but many, many people don't. And in fact, moving that particular habit around somewhat randomly can actually be beneficial to you, because actually moving it from one time a day to the other is that context independence that we really are seeking. Our nervous system tends to generate particular kinds of behaviors based not on time, but on our state. While schedules are important, it's not the specific time of day per se that's going to allow you to get into a habit and form that habit and consolidate that habit. Rather, it's the state that your brain and body are in that's important to anchor yourself to. By being able to do the same thing that we want to do, regardless of time of day or circumstances, that's how we know that we've achieved a real habit formation. And in doing so, it will make it far more likely that you'll be able to regularly engage in these habits and activities over a long period of time. And it will have a significant shift on allowing you to engage in particular habits more easily and to consolidate those habits more quickly. When it doesn't take much activation energy to get into the execution of that habit, and you can do it in any context, well, then you have formed a habit.